Hello and welcome to Unfiltered, a show all about websites, particularly WordPress websites. Today, the subject under discussion is website sustainability. And in order to have that discussion, I'm joined by three fabulous people. First off, I'm joined by Sai. How are you doing, Sai?
Very good. Thanks, Nathan. Very good.
I'm also joined by Yoast. Hello, Yoast.
Hey, Nathan. Thanks for having me.
And finally, by Louise. How are you doing, Louise?
Very well, thank you, and thanks for inviting me.
You're most welcome. Just before we begin, like I said, the topic under discussion today is website sustainability. Although it was a hot topic in 2023, I feel like it's going to be more of a hot topic in 2024 and beyond. Before we crack into the topic discussions and all of the different bits and pieces that we're going to throw around today, let's just find out a little bit about what we think, who we work for, what our positions are, and so on. So I'll just kick that off. I'm a podcaster in the WordPress space. And I'm always curious about new technologies, new initiatives. And so that's my interest. I want to see what other people are doing and what they're doing to push the boundaries with this topic. So let's take it over to Sai. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Sai.
Oh, okay. So I'm Sai Cook. I work for Filter as the head of business development. And I've been in web development for 20 years. Worked for agencies all my career. And like you, I'm always interested in kind of new trends and technologies, but I don't really see this as a trend. I think sustainability is a much wider subject and it's finally coming through. And recently I've discovered how we as an agency can actually kind of make a difference in our circle of influence. So it's become a really interesting topic for me.
Nice. Thank you very much. Let's go to Louise. Tell us a little bit about your background and your interest in website sustainability.
So I run a WordPress agency called Indigo Tree based in the UK. We've always been interested in building great websites with brilliant performance. And a couple of years ago, we started thinking about performance in relationship with sustainability. And to cut a long story short, we've now founded Canopy, and we're just about to finalise the launch of our new WordPress plugin that will measure the carbon footprint of your website, and we have investment from the lovely Yes to help us get there.
Well, that's the perfect segue then, isn't it? So let's hand it over to Joost to finish off our little introduction moment.
So I'm Joost. I'm the founder of a company called Joost here in the Netherlands, which Marika and I ran for quite a while. And then we sold in July, August of 2021. So that's a while ago already. And after that, we started investing into companies in the WordPress space. And one of the things I started doing because I was bored was looking at server logs. And as I was doing that, I was, getting a bit frustrated with how often things were being crawled that were absolute nonsense, and how all of this worked and how much energy we were actually wasting. So I started building something that we later on merged into Yoast SEO, and luckily all the other SEO plugins have merged since. But that's when I really started, um, getting interested into sustainability and even more from this perspective of like, hey, how are websites using CO2 and what is happening here and what can we do about that?
Okay, so the first topic under discussion is simply an orientation really into the subject. We're going to ask the question, what do we mean by digital sustainability? Kind of in my head, sustainability is all about preserving things for the future, making sure that things can last, but maybe I've got that wrong. So I'm just going to open that up to the panel. What do we mean by digital sustainability? You can take that in any which way you like.
Well, I can start by, there's an official answer from WSG about web sustainability, whether or not it's how everyone perceives it. They kind of break it up into a number of different topics, which is UX, its development, and business strategy and infrastructure. So those kind of four categories are what make up their definition of sustainability and what to concentrate on. But like I say, I think it depends on where you sit in the whole kind of ecosystem. You know, if you're working for a hosting company, for example, your priorities around sustainability are going to be different if you're working for a development company or a design agency. So everyone has their own kind of place to focus on, and I think it's important that like we recognize that, know where you're coming from, and know where you can have the biggest impact. So for us, it's obviously on the development side.
I think that's true. I think it's important to consider that a lot of people don't even think that the internet has a carbon footprint or might be affecting the planet. And we still come across a lot of people who, as soon as you explain that data is a proxy for electricity and electricity is a proxy for carbon, they can connect it together. But then the other thing that people forget about is the actual chips, the actual manufacturing, all these devices that would change every couple of years, and the amount that it costs the planet to actually even do the manufacturing and all the servers in the data centers. And then there's all the heating and cooling and the use of water. So you can broaden sustainability to also be other impacts on the planet as well. And whilst we're using all this electricity in digital, that means that that electricity may not be available for other parts of the economy as well.
Yeah, I think this is what's so my perspective on it is that a large part of what the internet consumes as electricity is actually waste. There's so much of it that we could just do away with in lots of different things. We'll talk about that probably later on, but the whole internet consumes tons of electricity, and people see the data centers and see the data centers being built, and they don't really tie it to sustainability. And I think what Louise said is very important. It is all these data centers and all these companies like Google will say, yeah, we're doing everything green, which is true. I mean, they are buying the certificates and doing what is needed to whitewash their or greenwash their things. But that electricity at that point is no longer available for the general public to use as green electricity. And thus we're basically causing our own problems. And when you greenwash all the electricity you buy, but your data center is next to a coal plant that is generating that electricity that you're using, that you're greenwashing through certificates, then you're not really helping the planet all that much.
It sounds from everything that we just said, and I could be encapsulating this incorrectly, but it sounds like there's kind of three zones of influence here. The first one being us as people who are in the internet space and building things which go online. So there's that piece. You know, what can we do to reduce the impact of the products that we launch, the SaaS services that we launch, the websites that we launch? And then you, Yoast, particularly, then just mentioned the hosting companies and all that infrastructure, which is kind of invisible to us. And I think the invisibility of it probably paints the problem a bit more, because you've got no conception really about the damage that you're doing, and really what the certificate that Google or anybody else has got, what that really means. But also, I suppose there's an education piece in the consumption of the internet as well. You know, the fact that we're all more or less addicted to our devices and we're happily scrolling them. And rather than saying, well, my battery's run out on my phone, I probably should have used it less, we instead complain about the capacity of the battery and just charge it up again, and the cycle repeats. So kind of like there's three different sections there: educating us as engineers, if you like, educating or learning from the hosting companies, and also as a consumer as well. I don't know if you've got anything you want to add into that. I was particularly interested, Louise or Yoast, if you've got any data, any hard numbers which give us some real impression as to how bad this problem is. I think it's so easy sitting in front of a glossy screen and not particularly clean, but you get the idea, clean keyboard, that really we're not doing anything. There's no damage being caused, because how can this benign thing that I'm using, which allows me to work and doesn't seem to have any pipes coming out the back with smoke and mist coming out, how can any of this possibly be doing any damage? So just maybe if we could just get into that quickly, give us some numbers somewhere.
I think that one of the key things is, in addition to the electricity usage, it's the embedded carbon of the devices. And my understanding is, and I can't remember the source, it's 70 to 80%. But actually, just by, for example, using your phone for 3 years rather than 2, and not just replacing it when your contract ends, you've immediately reduced that by an extra 50%, because you're spreading out the cost of that embedded carbon over the 3 years rather than 2. And the same with data centers. If they can, rather than replacing servers every 5 years, replace them every 6 years, suddenly you've got that extra 20% of usage out of that infrastructure. So there's all sorts of clever things you can do. And I think the important thing is, it's not just about measuring what you do, it's trying to reduce it and getting those efficiencies. So it might be from doing that really carbon efficient website, the data center, but it might also be just making sure you get more life out of your devices.
I think the number that you're looking for, Nathan, to some extent is, and the most shocking number to me, this is by the Australian Energy Council. Did some research on this a while ago, and they said that the internet will probably use a fifth of all the world's electricity by 2025.
Yeah.
So literally 1/5 of all the electricity in the world is going to the internet as a whole. And that's the combined usage of our data centers and everything else. But if you realize what that is, that it is absolutely gobsmackingly ridiculous. It's so much electricity, and it's only going up because research was done before AI. So with the advent of AI last year and what we're doing with that, it's the amount of energy increase that's come from that is absolutely insane. Another number that I saw in Fortune last year, I'll give you the links later for the show notes, is that AI caused Microsoft to use 34% more water in 2023 over 2022,
Gosh,
just to
that's a lot.
cool
Yeah.
the machines. Just like that sort of increase, which we're doing year over year. The fastest growing company on the planet last year in this space was the company that was producing the AI CPUs.
I guess there's a question around, I mean, I don't know the answer to this, but that there's a universal view that technology and AI specifically can solve problems and reduce energy consumption overall. Let's take like, if you can download something from the internet, as opposed to go to the shop and buy whatever you need. A simple being able to use technology to get resources to you quickly and efficiently. So that trend is becoming more and more and more. And in my view, it kind of always supersedes the argument. If you ever kind of have this conversation with my teenage kids, for example, that they will always say the world is more efficient using digital. And sometimes it's tough to kind of argue with that. But I think we just have to get past that and understand the effect that we are having on the digital industry. I mean, like I say, we only represent a small corner of the industry, and the argument is huge. It's a massive global conversation. And I guess what's important to me is what we can do about it. So I kind of recently learned this principle of moving from a kind of a passive voice into an activist kind of voice. And it made a big difference to me. Like, it was quite a big step, going from someone that would just sit in a room, listen to the argument, both sides, kind of nod and try and do what I could passively, to taking what feels like a brave step into trying to do something positive, however small it is. So from our, from my personal perspective and our agency perspective, being able to have some effect on an industry we're in a fortunate position where we're building sites, not just for ourselves, but for our clients and our client. So we build a site that gets millions of views, for example, we can actually have quite an impact. And I think that's what matters most. And that's what's of interest to me. Like, there are some big, scary numbers and figures out there, and it's quite easy to point the finger at certain corners of the ecosystem. And I think those corners, they need to step up and have this conversation themselves and work it out. Like the data centers, they need to figure this stuff out as well. I'm personally interested in what we can do about it, what impact we can have.
I love having conversations like this because it throws up things that I genuinely hadn't thought about before. So the first thing that comes to mind is, honestly, I'd never associated water with the internet. Not one time did that thought cross my mind that there was water involved. And of course, there's water involved in cooling the machines down. And the other thing which Louise said was that if something uses that resource, it's then no longer available to anybody else. So I suppose water is a perfect example because it's physical and you can understand it. If the Microsoft, say, is using 34% more water, presumably that's no longer available to be consumed as drinking water or agricultural water or whatever it may be. It's been used in.
Well, it's cooling water, right? So it is used to cool stuff, and after that, it's warm, and you have to do something with it. This is why we build a lot of these data centers up north or close to the south of the world, because it's easier to cool them there than it is around the equator.
Yeah.
But it is. I think that in the end, what we're talking about is finite resources. With a lot of different things that we can do with them. And I agree with you, Si. It is very much about what can we do. I'm in the fortunate position that I sometimes can actually do something at a slightly bigger scale, which is why I'm trying to do that. But it's also, I think actually website builders can do a lot. They can do a lot in making their websites just slightly better. And you know what's funny? Making them more sustainable also often means making them faster.
I think it's important as website builders. It's a bit like accessibility. You don't really want to give your clients a choice to make a poor decision. You don't want them to do something which makes their website inaccessible. In the same way as you don't want them to do something which makes their website use a lot more electricity to deliver the pages to the device or the browser. And there's things we can do technically to make it a good website from that perspective. And it doesn't even necessarily have to cost clients anymore if you build it in from the beginning. On the subject of the internet, the stat that I saw that really shocked me was that by 2050, they're predicting that digital is going to be over 30% of the global emissions, because as all the other industries decarbonize, the use of digital and AI and the Internet of Things and the web and streaming is proportionally going to take up more electricity as other industries use less. So actually, digital is going to become more and more important as other industries decarbonize.
Okay, so we're going to move on and we're going to tackle a different question for the next few moments. And that is, why is digital sustainability important for business? So I suppose we're moving outside of the sphere of you as an individual and what you can have an impact on in the way that you personally consume things, to thinking a little bit more about how you could position your business and what are the imperatives that your business may be under, for example, law or just, I don't know, moral obligations, things like that. So let's just throw that open. Why is it important for businesses in particular?
I don't mind starting with this one. I mean, there are dozens of reasons, of course, but I think businesses as a whole, they're becoming more and more aware that sustainability is something that they need to concentrate on. So quite often, it's an opportunity for a business to show their kind of dedication to kind of sustainability, to lowering their carbon footprint or their kind of energy usage. So your website is the public face of your business. It's seen by all your potential customers and so on and so forth. So why wouldn't you take that opportunity? And that, I do think of it as an opportunity as opposed to like a chore, like something you have to do. Louise, I think you alluded to it earlier. There's this connection that a lot of people don't realize to do with performance and sustainability. It's actually the same thing with accessibility. So in the past, those two things like sustainability and accessibility are almost seen as like, if you see them in a brief, they're something of a chore, of an added task, there used to be tick boxing exercises that people have to achieve a certain level for a public perception. But in reality, if you make and Josh, you said this as well, like it's so true. If you make a site energy efficient, it's likely you've made it fast. The more file size you sort of squeeze out of a site, you optimize images, you optimize the code, the faster the page load, the less energy you're using to load that page. All of a sudden, the more performant the site is, the better it does on Core Web Vitals, the better the user experience. Then there's clear stats to show that users are going to stay on your site longer, the bounce rate's going to drop. The whole experience is heightened in quality. So you have to ask yourself, why would you not do that? Why would you not produce a really kind of high performing website that happens to be energy efficient? It's a bit of a no-brainer, really, in my view. So it's almost like, the argument, it's just really tough to argue against why a business wouldn't be thinking about this kind of thing. And I think it's, as long as agencies and developers, freelancers, etc., everyone in the industry are starting to think like this on behalf of businesses, I think before we know it, that this will almost be sort of common practice within a few years. It's just a case of like taking opportunities like this to get the message out to the wider audience.
I would want to add to that one thing. It's very good to make everything fast. And I fully agree that actually it helps for lots of different reasons, not the least of them SEO of your website and etc. There's one very adverse effect though of making your website faster. You know what happens when you make your website faster? Search engines crawl it more. So you end up generating more views because your website is faster. And in the end, the CO2 effect might be almost neutral. This is why we also need to look at like, hey, what can we do about the crawling? How can we restrict that? And also, I think there's an even more important question that we have to ask ourselves: is what we're making now on this website, is this new page, is this really a value add to the web? Is this really a value add to our users? Because if it's not like really adding value to anyone, and there's a lot of pages that are being created for reasons other than because users need them. And I think that we really need to ask ourselves that question a bit more often. Like, do we need this page? And in a lot of cases, one of the things I'm doing myself in WordPress core at the moment is trying to reduce the number of pages and URLs that WordPress creates. Because WordPress creates a whole lot of URLs that are just not needed. And search engines will spider those. And we're trying to get rid of them. So there's more to it.
It's a good point. And especially when you've got AI, sorry, Louise, the concept of AI generated content that with the ability to create pages autonomously, then all of a sudden you've got a massive, wastage that just happens without thought. So yeah, I see your point.
I think it's important for us to educate our users. I think there's little bits like removing the image attachment URLs. Stu wrote a lovely little plugin that does something with tags when there's less than 10 articles in a particular taxonomy, and it's all those little bits, because I know when we're looking at websites, actually, from a user's point of view, they might be only, I don't know, 40 or 50 pages they're going on regularly. But in the back end, when you crawl the site, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds that you just need to stop Google and the other search engines from crawling, or even stop certain search engines from crawling altogether. If you're a UK-based farmer solicitors, you don't need search engines from China and Russia even crawling your website. You can just turn them off. And that will immediately reduce the amount of data that the hosting server is serving that nobody sees, but it's happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think
I think
this is probably the most painful thing about websites, is that the difference between what you see in your analytics and what your hosting company sees as traffic to your website is vast. For a lot of websites, 60 to 80% of their traffic will not show up in their analytics. It will be bots and other things, especially if you have a website with relatively low traffic. So much of it will be search engines and other visitors that are not the things that you think are visitors to your site. So being aware of that a bit more is probably one of the things that we need to do. We need to actually make people look at the web server logs and realize what their site is doing.
It's interesting. This episode it has a certain target audience, and it isn't the general public. It's people who are into building websites and agency owners, and people are interested in having their products put online and all of that. I'm just wondering if there's a bigger picture here where people like yourselves have in the future some responsibility to explain to the general public what it is that they're consuming when they browse the internet. So it's like this, not only are we making lean websites with less URLs so that there isn't the capacity to stumble across the meaningless page and the server doesn't need to hold on to meaningless data, but also to sort of remove ourselves a little bit and ask ourselves the question, do I really need to be looking at this at this time? Do I really need to download this document? Do I really need to do? So I just wonder if you think, I'm going to throw this one out to Louise, actually, because I know that you've obviously, this has become part of your job description in a way. I'm just wondering if you have benefited from positioning yourself as a air quotes environmentalist. If your business has grown, if people have been receptive to it, if it's in the same way that you might have an SEO expert, for example. Do you see that in the future there will be people who position themselves as an environment expert? And also, do you see that there's a role for us to educate the wider population? So there's two questions in there, really.
I think that with my agency hat on, it's absolutely helped us. It's genuinely helped us win work because we've got information in our deck about what we can do to help. And from Canopy's point of view, I think there's another couple of different things we can do. So we can educate their marketing team and the people who are actually editing their websites, and they are all consumers of websites as well. So that education piece can start with the people who are the experts, but you can filter it out to more people. And when we did some user research, we found that a lot of web editors, they're not familiar with accessibility and sustainability like we are. We're in it every day, but they're not. They've got a busy life. They're doing social media and blogs and advertising and all sorts of things. And the website is only one part of that. So we can help to educate them. I think the other side of it is to genuinely think about how companies can educate their visitors. And it may be by putting a little widget on a page, just saying, did you realize this page your visit has consumed this many grams of electricity? It might also just be about thinking about those marketing campaigns and whether they need to land on a website, and when they do, trying to optimize those landing pages before you even start. If you know the size of the page and you're going to get 500,000 views in the next month, well, do you really need 8 images? Can you get away with 4? So it's about, I think it's a number of different levels that education piece can happen. And I think it's about people realizing that the internet pollutes.
What you were saying there, it brings into my head the phrase carrot and stick. And we would love that everybody just was happy to do everything because it was the right thing to do. But I'm wondering if there are ways that we could demonstrate our environmental credentials. So we're in the UK, Louise, Si, and I, and it may be different where Yoast is. But are there any kind of accreditations that you can show on your website or the websites that you build for clients to demonstrate that this work has been done? I genuinely have no idea whether there's anything like that. So something where you get something in return for putting in the effort. So it's not just a task of, okay, we've got to do the environmental thing. That's what the boss has told us to do. More, okay, we're going to do this, A, because it's good for the planet, but we get something back in return. We've boosted our credentials as an agency, but also we've boosted the company's website that we built because we've been able to put that badge on that website.
I don't think
Yeah.
there's any badges as such. There is a draft standard that's been released, but a lot of that is more about some technical things around speeding up the website. I think from a business's point of view, though, there's quite a lot of legislation coming down the line. And at the moment, digital isn't one of the mandatory reporting things you have to report on. But in a world where companies are really struggling to report on and measure their overall carbon footprint, if as agencies and as suppliers, we can give them the carbon footprint of what we are doing for them and what we've produced, i.e. their website, then actually that's a quick win. And more importantly, if you can measure what the old site was like or what the new site's like or the before and after, and you can start to put those sorts of measurements into a company's carbon reduction plan. And for large organisations, that's going to start to become really important.
Sorry, forgive me, Louise. What is a carbon reduction plan? Is
right. So certain large organisations in the UK, there is already legislation which says you've got to have a carbon reduction plan. So if you go, for example, onto Tesco's website, which is a large supermarket, they've got lots of information about how they're measuring emissions in various ways, their electricity, their use of petrol and diesel, but then also some of their supplier emissions as well. And what they have pledged to do is reduce the amount of carbon. Well, you've got to measure where you are, get that benchmark, and then reduce it. So I don't think at the moment they're measuring their website and their digital, but it's certainly something that they could look at, do a benchmark, and then look at how they can optimize and reduce. And that can go into their carbon reduction plan. And because they're a really large organization, there are mandatory reporting standards that they have to adhere to.
Yeah, and on my side of the planet, where I'm in the EU, unlike some of us, all of that is actually probably for the same size businesses because the legislation stems from EU origins. It is mandatory now and will become mandatory slowly for smaller businesses over the next few years. So more and more businesses will be required to think about this and to report on their CO2. We're actually getting to something that I find incredibly boring, to be honest, but CO2 accounting. If you thought that accounting was already boring, I think CO2 accounting is the next level of boringness. But it is. It becomes more and more important. And these carbon reduction plans, I mean, for a lot of companies, I can see reducing your website's carbon footprint as something that's actually fairly achievable compared to quite a few of the other things that they need to do. I mean, if on the one hand you need to replace cars to become to have less carbon emissions, or you make your website faster, I can tell you what's easier to do. And if you have a lot of visitors to your website, it might actually have similar impact. And I think that there's education needed about that, so that's why we do podcasts like these, etc. And then people will start to notice, like, hey, this is actually something that we can do, and that is good for our business. And in the long run, I'm hoping that hosting companies will be billing you a bit more by actual usage of power for your by your website. We're getting there a bit more with cloud-based hosting solutions, but at some point we'll actually have to measure like how much electricity is your website using and bill you for that.
Oh, that's interesting. So in the same way you may be measured for bandwidth at the moment, the amount of packets of data that egress the computer, that's also possibly going to be a metric. Yeah, that's interesting. Just from something that you said there, it strikes me that as a business, the sooner you jump on this, the better. Because from what Louise said, it felt like you have to have the benchmark before you can prove anything. So doing that now means that you'll have data going back years and years and years, and obviously that will be an easier thing to explain to the general public and put into your carbon reduction plan and so on. So this is a service which I'm guessing Louise is already offering, but as a web agency, if you've done this and you've got experience, you can go to potential clients and say, look, we've done this before. We know what we're doing. We've got a report that we can create for you and what have you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And it's
Yes.
really important to have that benchmark, because actually, as a business grows, you might start off with a website with, I don't know, 500,000 views a month, and in 2 or 3 years end up with 2, 3, 4 million views a month.
To just jumping back to your previous question, Nathan, that there are some badges and accreditations out there. I know of a couple. One is WESG.Earth, but what these accreditations are, they're self-assessments, most of them, including the WSG. So you have as a developer, you have an opportunity to follow best green development best practice, and kind of assess yourself and against a number of kind of criteria to see whether or not you have, for example, compressed fonts or images or minified certain scripts. All these different techniques. But the problem is, not one website or digital products, no two are the same, and it's incredibly difficult to measure, so that there isn't like a single benchmark that you can pass. And so I don't think there's ever likely to be a like green badge to say, yeah, you've passed, or if there is, it's going to be, it's going to be somewhat made up, and it's going to be easy to argue that it's not very accurate. So until that does happen, right now the responsibility for kind of putting in best practice for green development lies on agencies to responsibly do that work. And if they go through a self-assessment to do that honestly, and then you have got other things like websitecarbon.com that can show you exactly how much carbon the page is emitting. But even that, when you drill down into that, the accuracy of that, it is hard to sort of check that it's right or not. You don't know that much information about your data centers. I've run that test on our own site, and it's it comes up with, yep, you're on Google Cloud infrastructure, you're green, you're good to go. And I actually got, it actually said, here's the badge, download your green hosting badge. But I'm not 100% sure how much I believe that, as Joost said earlier, whether the actual data about whether Google is using renewable energy for all their data centers, I just don't know. I just don't know whether that's true or not.
Now, the funny thing is that I think the legislation will help us here, because the legislation will force bigger companies to report on their overall CO2 usage. And for hosting companies, they won't be able to say that digital is not a part of that, because it's part and parcel of what they do every day. So they will have to report on the CO2 usage of their company as a whole, which at that point means that they need to have some idea about that. And then they can probably bring it down to start looking at the individual websites fairly easily. So I'm looking at that angle a bit to see like, hey, how could we report that? I agree with you, Sai. I mean, the website Carbon Calculator is an awesome thing, and people should definitely look at it. It's websitecarbon.com, just because it gives you a feel for what are we talking about. Um, but whether it's accurate and whether those numbers are are reproducible is hard to say. At the same time, you need some measurement, and at least measured consistently over time to see whether you are improving or not. And even if you're measuring it wrong by a twofold, or you're only measuring half of what it is, if you can show that you've improved, that is the most important thing. It's basically the same as with website analytics. I always tell people to not fuzz about the numbers too much and look at the trends.
Yeah,
And I think that's important here as well.
yeah,
I guess we've
agree.
done this before, haven't we? As societies and nations, we've been faced with problems that need to be fixed, and we've created committees and rules and legislation around it. And I guess we forget sometimes that the internet is still quite young. You know, if you look at the automotive industry or the oil industry, it's got a lot more heritage behind it, and so there has been time to create those things. And maybe this is just maybe we're just at that tipping point, the moment where we're starting to cotton on to the fact that we need to be told how
Mm.
we can do this, and we need guidance, and we need I don't know, software or tools or people to come into our businesses and do the checking for us, and then give us some kind of accreditation.
I think that it's important to realise there's a spurious level of accuracy in some of the tools. So a lot of large organisations, they're measuring carbon in tonnes and thousands of tonnes, and a lot of the tools are measuring carbon in grams. And this comes back to what Joost was saying earlier about you can measure the page, but actually for a lot of websites, the hidden traffic is way more outweighs the visitor traffic. So although it's important to optimize your website for your visitors, it's also important to realize there's other things you can do sort of slightly more at the infrastructure level by making good choices around hosting. The other thing to bear in mind is it actually depends where your visitors are in the world, because in the UK, we actually have a lot of renewable energy. On a good day, our energy mix is more than 50% renewable. There are other places in the world where that isn't the case. So if you have a lot of visitors who aren't in the UK, then actually the energy required for their website is much more likely to be from coal-powered fire stations generating the electricity than it is
Mm.
if it's in the UK. So there's all sorts of complicated things that are going on that make a big difference to that actual calculation itself.
Okay, so I think we've done a pretty good job laying the groundwork there, but it's a fairly high level view. We've talked a lot and ideas and concepts and what have you, and that's given me the impression that we really ought to be doing something. We know what's coming. The science is pretty concrete. You know, we know what's coming down the pike if we don't amend our ways. So why aren't we all falling over ourselves to get this work done? What are some of the barriers that are stopping us being more sustainable? What are the things out there in the wild that mean that you're not putting this as priority number one when you do the work?
Um, I have a theory on this. If I can jump in with it, I think, and it's something I've experienced personally. I think there is a fear of greenwashing that exists in lots of individuals and lots of businesses. That if you're in a marketplace with competitors and peers and so on, and some businesses might move into that sustainability space earlier than yourself, um, and every business is looking for a unique proposition. They're looking for their space in the market that makes them different. So for a while now, from an agency perspective, this is my experience. I've kind of looked at the market and gone, well, there are agencies who position themselves as kind of green agencies, and sustainability is their thing. And I've kind of been, well, that's not really our thing. We've got something else as our thing. Um, so for Filter, we're more about performance and personalization, and to some degree, that has held us back. Like that thinking that we can't enter that space because it's not our thing. And if we do enter that space, then there may be a public perception. Like all of this is crazy. When I say it out loud, it just sounds a bit nuts, really, that the fear that people might think we're greenwashing, when the fact is we actually know how to do this. We know how to build really high performance, low energy sites. Why can't we, why can't we just be honest about it and start doing it for our clients? We don't have to be that agency. It's just part of our toolkit now. I think my theory is that many people share that same view, that they're kind of afraid moving into the space. But the truth is, it's everybody's space, right? We're all allowed.
Can I just drill down on that a little bit, Si? So is it the fear that you talked about? Is that fear of being put next to companies that have been doing this for years and making a direct comparison? Or is it a fear of getting into new work, meaning that you'll have to learn new skills and get yourself, learn a whole bunch of new things that you don't already know? Maybe it's both, maybe it's neither.
It's definitely the first one. So there's very rarely a fear in my experience in the agency world that the agencies fear new technologies or new things. Like we welcome that. Like it's a challenge. Everyone wants to dive into something new. It's quite often the opposite, where you have to kind of resist diving into new innovative technologies. Like you have to stop yourself sometimes. So it's definitely not that. Like we're all going to try and learn new tech, and especially things that are good, obviously good for the planet and our future. So it's more of a social kind of peer view thing. It's more to do about your positioning and how you're viewed against other agencies. And I think once you get past that, then you realize that it's a bit of a crazy way to think. I just have a view that I've experienced that at more than one place. So yeah, it's the first.
Okay, thank you.
I think that there's a thing that we could do here to take that barrier away, is to just start doing it and not use it in our marketing. I mean, you don't have to talk about everything that you do in your marketing. You just have to do it. If you're right now not building sustainable websites that are accessible and even just fast because users want that, then you're not building good websites.
Yeah.
Nice.
I also think that you can't manage what you can't measure. And that's where Canopy comes in, actually, because as an agency, you can say you've got a website that's AA accessible if you can go through a whole load of manual and automated checks and you can confirm that lots of things have been built in the right way. How do you say a website is low carbon? How do you measure it? Or how do you show the improvement over time? How do you compare what you had 12 months ago with what you've got now? And actually, if you can measure that, or you can measure it on behalf of your clients, then at that point, you've also got some data backing up what you're saying, which means you can't be accused of greenwashing. And I think that's really important to make sure that it actually comes from a place of having information and data rather than just opinion.
Okay, so we've had a little quick discussion there about some of the things which may be holding us back. And one of those things may be we simply don't know what to do. So let's address that right now. I'm going to broadly ask the question, what are some of the things, some of the concrete steps that you can take? There may be dozens of these, I don't know, but if we can just concentrate on some of the high level items to begin with, and then we can pick out the minutiae as we go. But what are some of the things that you as an individual or as a business or as an agency can do, concrete steps that you can do to make yourself more sustainable?
Well, if I can kick it off, there's a lot of things that are from the speed portion of things. So things that you would do to optimize your web speed are things that you do to optimize your website's sustainability as well. So using smaller images, using better compression, using caching. I think all of these things are things that we don't talk about enough for the many benefits that they have. So I think that's very important. I'll take my pet thing and say the first thing you need to do is get a crawler, crawl your own website. Something like Screaming Frog, which is actually out of the UK as well. you'll crawl your own website and then look through the list of URLs that crawler has found on your website. And if you're anything like the average website developer out there, be amazed, because you'll look at that list and that list will probably have 3 to 4 times more URLs than you think your site has. And then go and look at why those URLs exist and what you can do to disable them. And honestly, I think that is already such a large part of the work that you could be doing. And there's a lot of simple things. So Louise mentioned it offhand in one of her first remarks. We've removed the attachment URLs from WordPress core. So for new WordPress sites, there won't be, if you upload an image, WordPress will no longer create a page just for that image. It used to always do that. But on old sites, those things are still on. So disabling those is a very simple way of reducing the amount of pages on your site by a lot, because those things exist. A crawler will find them, and no normal visitor will ever get there, but crawlers will find them, and they will spider them every day, if not multiple times per day. So running that crawler over your website and really knowing what is on your website, and then getting rid of everything that you don't need, would be my first suggestion on what you can do to really optimize your website for lots of different reasons. This is good for your SEO. This is good for your speed. It's good for a lot of different things.
So I could maybe just sum that up as reduce. Reduce the size of your images, reduce the amount of images, but also go and have a look at the things that you could reduce in terms of the actual size of your website, the pages that nobody's ever going to look at, and so on.
Exactly.
And luckily, being in the WordPress space, well, I suppose it's a double-edged sword. Not WordPress created those URLs in the first place, but there's lots of tutorials out there and plugins that can help with this work. And so there's no shortage of places to go and discover how to do this. So yeah, thank you for that. Either Louise or Si, have you got anything you want to add?
Well, I'd say not being a developer myself, it's hard to pinpoint those sort of individual tasks. I'd say from the point of view of someone who is perhaps commissioning a new site or is in charge of a site, has ownership or accountability for the site, it's really about the measurement to start with. So that's the very first thing. So let's say you were writing a brief for a new site. You need to ensure that if you're asking your agency or your developer, that they have a method of measuring the footprint of the site. So whether that's page by page using a tool like Canopy or websitecarbon.com, ensuring that you at least have that benchmark. So that's the thing. Write that into your brief. Have that set down, and then also try and create targets towards lowering that footprint. I would suggest targeting pages with high traffic, the ones, if this is a systematic thing, if you've got a large site with hundreds or thousands of pages, you have to approach this sensibly. You've got to go for the pages that have the highest traffic, or indeed the highest kind of file size, as it were, to ensure that you're jumping in and tackling those first. So having the highest impact first, but essentially having a plan, having a measurement, having a way of reporting on that in the future, reporting the success of what you're doing is the key thing. And then, for me, that's then relying on the expertise of good developers and good UX designers to be able to create fast, efficient pages is the way forward.
I feel this next question may be slightly wrong-headed, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you include this, either Louise or Si, do you include this as like a line item in your proposal for work? In other words, does it get added in as a bolt-on extra? Okay, we'll build the website, and then what we'll do is we'll go back and we'll retrofit it with all of the sustainable bits done afterwards. So again, you can see how that question is poorly thought through. But I'm just wondering if you want to take that one and maybe alter the question and adapt it and make it more sensible.
We wouldn't give clients a choice, because I don't want them to think it costs more money. It actually genuinely doesn't cost more money when you're building a site. It might cost them a little bit of money if you're taking a site that's been built by someone else and trying to make it more accessible and more sustainable and things like that. But actually, if you build it from the ground up, knowing that that's what you want to do, then you just do it right first time rather than have to retrofit. I think the other thing to think about is it's great when you've got your shiny new website and everybody's really happy with it. What's it going to be like 6 months down the line? And I think that's about educating the client and the people who are going to be editing the site going forward, and making sure they understand the consequences of replacing that very well optimized image on the homepage with maybe a video that isn't as well optimized. And we all have clients who want videos banner as well, and you have to think about that in the terms of the data that is going to be transferred as a result. And get them to think about it. They might still want it, but it's about having that knowledge and making the decision with all the information. And then if they are planning that advertising campaign, maybe giving themselves a carbon budget or calculating what the carbon footprint's going to be based on their estimated traffic before they start, and then thinking about how they can reduce it before it's already happened. Because it's better to do it, to measure first and set yourself a budget or a target, than it is to go, whoops, didn't do as well as we could have done.
I think I was hoping that's what you'd say. So that's ideal. It's not a question of retrofitting, but also the bit that I wanted to tease out of that was the cost implication for the client. And from what you've just said, the cost implication is zero for the client.
For us, it depends. Like I would say, if you're talking about in a new build, then this kind of thing is worked into our process. So, building efficient sites is not something that we. Short answer is no. We don't write a line item for building, energy efficient sites. That's part of the process. But there are circumstances when it is retrofitted. So people come to us with a site that's already existing, and that may be part of the project where actually the requirement is coming to us as an agency and helping them lower those emissions. So by retrofitting a lot of the work that we've talked about, anything from image compression to script modification, that kind of thing can be done retrospectively. So sometimes that's the case, but if it's a new build, then that's just the way that we build sites these days.
I also want to state clearly, once again, it's 2024 and I can't believe I'm saying this, but no, video headers are not a good idea for your website. No, image carousels are not a good idea for your website. These things don't work. But I still encounter websites where, funnily enough, my son was optimizing the website of one of our investment portfolio companies, and they had this nice orange going video. The only thing it was doing was moving a gradient along. It looked very, very nice, but it was 4 megabytes, and it was like, why are you doing this? Why are designers still coming up with this stuff in 2024 and not realizing that slows down the page gigantically for no reason whatsoever other than a bit of, making it look good? I don't think you need to build ugly websites because they need to be fast. I think we can build really, really nice looking, really fast, really good websites. But there are some things that we can't do if we want to really consider doing this well. And one of them is not using things like that. So not having weird videos and for things that are not needed. And at the same time, sometimes a video is needed to demo something or to show something, and that's fine. But don't autoplay it. Then don't do all the things that annoy users anyway, and you'll probably end up building a better website.
I'm going to just quickly go through a list. We had a bunch of things in some notes which we wrote in order for this episode to be put together. I'll just list them off just in case anybody's curious listening to this. So this is what we had. We had optimize images and media. I think we've probably talked about that. Use website caching. Again, I think we've done that. Simplify the navigation. We may come back to that. Make use of a CDN. content delivery network, minimize file usage, limit video usage, embrace lazy loading, optimize the code, reduce the weight of pages, and measure and monitor. I don't know if there's any of those that you feel we didn't do justice. I don't think we touched on number 3, which was the simplify site navigation. But if there is anything you wanted to dwell on specifically there, now's the moment.
Well, I think simplifying site navigation actually ties into what I said in the beginning. Is like you need to know what's on your site. You need to make it as easily accessible and as quickly accessible as possible, with the least amount of pages needed on your site.
Yeah. I think that term refers to not just the page sort of reduction in number of pages, but it's obviously referring to the usability of the navigation, the efficiency in which a user can move around your site and get from A to B and get the answer that they want. The more complex it is, the more page loads, the more, data that needs downloading. So just ensuring like best practice UX is good for sustainability.
Another thing that I would want to mention here, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't, it says optimize code was one of the things, Nathan, you mentioned in that list. If you stay up to date with the latest version of WordPress, you'll actually get performance improvements and thus CO2 reductions with every single release, because the core WordPress team has been working on this so hard. And WordPress has literally become 40% faster just in the last year. So that's a tremendous effort by the WordPress core team. And I think that a lot of these things you'll get automatically just by staying up to date with WordPress core.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think you're right. 18 months ago, it wasn't really so much on the radar. And then the performance team began doing work and very, very quickly found significant improvements and made those improvements. And yeah, the end result of that is pretty astonishing. So you're in a good place.
Well, it's not the end result. I don't think we're there.
Right.
The company we run our investments from, Amelia Capital, we also employ one core developer called Ari, who's an amazing guy who's working right now, for instance, on an autoload proposal for WordPress core, where we'll be using autoloading for more parts of WordPress core. So we actually load less files on each page load. Things like that can have a tremendous impact. And the only thing that you need to do to get that is just stay up to date with the most recent version of WordPress, and you'll get all of that automatically.
I think the other thing aligned with what Yost was saying is also make sure things like your hosting is kept up to date. So improvements in PHP, it's come on leaps and bounds. So even things like making sure you're on the latest version of PHP will make a difference to performance. And there's no one magic bullet. There's just lots and lots of little things, which if you put them all together, means that you end up with a blazingly fast website and it doesn't have the cost the planet.
The one that I think piques my curiosity, because on the one hand I can see exactly how it works, but on the other hand I can see exactly how it might defeat itself, is the CDN. Because I know that putting things to the edge is a good idea, but you've also switched on more things in more places. So there's more data being stored in more places, but presumably the access of that data is the thing that we're worried about, the data moving to and fro. But I find that one curious, and maybe for a local solicitors or lawyers, like you said, Louise, earlier, that maybe isn't something you want to explore. But if you're a global website, having a CDN switched on has remarkable effects, even though it seems somewhat counterintuitive that you've put your website in a variety of different places.
CDNs have other features built in as well.
Right.
So, for example, Cloudflare can deliver WebP images when it's set up in the right way. So actually, even if you are a local company, actually using the CDNs can be really helpful, because they're already optimizing all sorts of things than just delivering the website to the browser.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm on Team Cloudflare too. So from my perspective, every website should be behind Cloudflare, because it literally makes every website better. It is insane what they've done for the web in terms of making all the underlying technologies better and optimizing websites easily so well. It really is a very, very amazing tool, and I think everyone should be using it.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about what we can do, what the problems are. Let's stare into the crystal ball a little bit and talk about what may be happening in the future. I know that Yoast and Louise, obviously, we've got a tool that they've been working on called Canopy. We can talk about that. But more broadly, any intuitions as to what the future holds? Have you got sight of any technology which is just over the horizon that you think is interesting, that may be worth mentioning, that people can fixate upon once they've watched this?
I've got a good example actually of something I came across recently, which was a site, climateaction.tech. I don't know if any of you've seen that. It was linked from website carbon.com. And it's actually it's this side of the horizon, and they have a brand magazine, which the name eludes me right now. I think it's called Branch. And Branch has its own website, and the website uses an API that taps into global kind of electricity usage. So, Louise, you mentioned earlier about depending where you are, and largely depends on how economical the energy usage is. So this site taps into where the user is, and it displays a different version of itself depending on where the user is, which I thought was quite cool. So it would show like a really sort of slimmed down, lean version if you're in a high energy usage area, and it operates live, so it can track via API what's going on. So for me, that was like the first example of a site that is reactive to the situation. So it's tapped into what's going on and where users are, and it's changing and adapting to the situation. And I think it's a really good example because I come from a design background, and I know one thing I know is that sort of necessity is the mother of innovation. And this whole thing that we're talking about, sustainability, it's if you look at it from a sort of design thinking perspective, it's an opportunity for us to create new innovative things. Like, it's an exciting thing. So I think the future, over the next few years, we're going to see all sorts of technology or design innovations that are going to be adapted, that are going to bring the message of sustainability to the forefront, without it being like the usual, like hammering the drum of green, just green design, green websites, everything just being quite obvious. I think we're going to see more subtle innovation in the future.
Terrific. Thank you. Louise?
Yeah, so obviously with my Canopy hat on, I think that what people are going to be doing is a lot more measurement and a lot more looking at the numbers and then discussing with their agencies what they can do to make those reductions, putting in budgets, thinking about their marketing, thinking about how they can optimize the sites. I think from a business perspective at the moment, as a small business, we're not affected by any of the legislation. I can quite imagine by the end of the decade that, as well as having to do my company tax return with the numbers of finances, I would have to do a carbon return as well, even as a small business. That's what larger businesses are having to do, and I think that's going to filter down. And as that filters down, I think it's going to affect more and more small and medium-sized enterprises. And at that point, there's going to be far more commercial pressures around procurement and finance, making sure that this bubbles up to the top of people's agenda. Because even if it isn't now, I think in 5 or 10 years' time, it's going to be absolutely part of every brief. Will be, how are you going to make sure my website, those digital scope 2 emissions, can be measured and included in our carbon reduction plan? And you see it already with larger businesses. If you send your parcels via DHL and you're a large business, they will literally send you a file telling you for all your parcels that they've delivered, here's the carbon footprint of all those deliveries. And I would expect as an agency, we would have to do that for a lot of our clients, calculate the carbon footprint of the products and services we're providing. So I can see that coming down the line, and that meaning that there's a lot more of a focus across the board on making sure that sustainability is one of those priorities.
You mentioned the tool that you've been involved with, Canopy. I'm just going to spell it out so that you can actually find it. It's Kanoppi, and I am not going to let you get away with describing it so briefly, I'm afraid. Tell us more about what it does. You mentioned that it does measuring, but are
Yes.
you able to expand on that a little bit and give us some?
Yep. So we're taking some calculations for each page on a website of the page weight, which is similar to what Website Carbon does. But then we're putting in some extra information. So rather than just measuring an individual visit, we're looking at whether a device is being looked, whether the web page is being looked at on a mobile or a desktop. We're looking at whether someone's in the UK or outside of the UK. And for pages on the website, we're calculating essentially a carbon footprint by traffic. And that means that you could have a really heavy page with a really high carbon footprint per visit that gets, 1 or 2 visits a week. And you think, well, should we be optimizing that page? Well, no, because actually our homepage gets 5,000 visits a week. And even though it's already quite well optimized, just eking out those little bits of extra optimization will actually produce a bigger reduction. So it's about working out which areas to work on, and then in the future, potentially looking at planning out campaigns and doing more to predict what the carbon footprint will be. And we've got bigger plans as well. We've also as part of the tool, we've got an estimation of the hidden carbon footprint of their bottom search traffic as well. So we can incorporate that into those calculations. So it's not just based on visitor analytics. As Joost was saying, there's far bigger proportion of the traffic is actually from what we don't see.
Okay, I'm going to ask more questions, I'm afraid. Um, is it essentially scraping the front end of the website and seeing what is loaded, making judgments about, okay, there's this image and it's this size?
You can be very, very accurate. You can go down into, 2 or 3 decimal places of grams, but actually for most websites, you don't need that accuracy. When you're reporting carbon, you can do it in tons. So actually the individual numbers themselves, as Joost was saying, it's a bit like SEO. What you're looking for is an overall number, and then you're looking at the way of measuring carbon is going to be refined over time as well. And the way we've built our tool, obviously, is that better calculation comes along. We can include it. We can include extra factors in that calculation. But what's important is you're actually looking at this page gets lots of visits and it could be improved. This page, well, because it doesn't get any visits, even though it could be improved a lot more, it's not worth doing.
Interesting. Okay. And does it have any knowledge of the infrastructure the website's living on? So does it know about the server and what the,
So
I don't know, the PHP
we're-
version or what have you? Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a factor for if you're running on green hosting. There's also a factor you could put in, for example, if you know the portion of repeat visitors, because obviously if they've got assets hashed, then there's less data to download on that second visit. So there's other factors that can be built into it.
Just to be clear, this is a WordPress plugin, is it? Or is it a service, like a SaaS service or?
It is going to be launched as a WordPress plugin. I can see it's smelly. I'm not quite sure. Yes, it will be launched as a service as well. We are hoping to make some money.
Okay, that's fine. That's lovely. Thank you for giving us all of that. And Joost, obviously you've got real intuitions that this was a project that you wished to be involved with. Do you just want to speak about that? What it was about this project that caught your eye?
Well, so Canopy is I think the first step of many of these things, because as Louise never fails to remember everyone, you have to measure before you can improve. And I think that because of that, it's actually fairly important. And there is not a whole lot of other tools out there that are doing similar things to what Canopy is doing, which is why I really love what they're doing. And it's also why I'm urging them to build a SaaS, because there is more than WordPress out there. And I think that there's just a ton of opportunity from a business perspective, but also like a ton of good that we can do by making people more aware of what is actually happening and what is and how much electricity we're all using and how we could improve on that.
Isn't it nice when you get to be in a business where you have a bright horizon of clearly growing interest, but also it's doing good. So you've got
I
a
well, that's a choice, Nathan. I
yeah,
mean, all of us can choose what to work on, and I choose to only work on and with things that actually do good for the world, because otherwise I find it unworthy of my time.
If you're interested in the topics that we've been discussing today, Filter have produced a free Marketer's Guide to Sustainability ebook. Find out how to make your website more sustainable while simultaneously improving performance and conversions. The ebook covers Is Your Website Sustainable?, an introduction to Canopy, and what are the benefits of better sustainability. Download the ebook now at filter.agency/resources/guides/sustainability-guide. See you next time on Unfiltered.